So, we finished last clip by stressing the fact that this capitalist organization of society kills all styles except one uniforming, standardizing style. The culture industry create a style which is equivalent of the unity of style expresses in each case the different structure of social power. This is true in the Middle Age and in the Renaissance for Adorno and Durkheim. Well, he goes through Mozart, Schoenberg, Picasso, and the Dadaism and all that. But the point of conclusion is style represents a promise in every work of art. A promise. Which is this promise? The promise held out by the work of art that it will create truth by lending a new shape to the conventional social forms is as necessary as it is hypocritical. The art is subsumed. Instead of exposing itself to this failure in which the style of the great work of art has always achieved self-negation, the inferior work has always relied on its similarity with others, on a surrogate identity. So art fails because it can't keep that promise of bringing truth. And why? Because it's reduced to imitation, so to a surrogate product. Imitation, so art becomes mere imitation. But the point is that in the culture industry, this imitation finally becomes absolute. Having ceased to be anything but style, it reveals the latter's secret. Obedience to the social hierarchy. We have the entrance, as we said before, administration, management. And with that, industrialization of the art. And then we start talking of culture. The moment that we talk culture, we're not in the culture anymore. So that's what the point is. To speak of culture was always contrary to culture. To speak of culture was always contrary to culture. What I notice, well, what underlies all this reasoning, it's this idea of sameness. The sameness is the leading thought, because by subordinating in the same way, and to the same end all areas, that's the sameness again. So what happens? Another idea, which I forgot. The leisure time. The leisure time is transformed. It's fed to the consumer as the same. That's another sameness. The same time character that is present in the factory. There is the same stamp on it. The work in the factory, the time spent in the factory, the life in the factory has a stamp. This stamp is the same that is impressed on the entertainment when the consumer goes home. The labor process, okay, and the leisure process carry the same stamp. It seems weird to say that, but that's because they have these two type of time, if you can describe that as two different type of times: spending time, or occupying yourself, or filling your senses with something, have to contribute to one thing: unification. Okay? Culture has to be unified and therefore standardized and uniform. What consisted the subordination of? What the subordination consists in this obedience to social hierarchy. Okay? Culture is big. It's when they speak of culture, it's like you have to think management and administration. So it's not culture at all when they say culture. And also this industrialized aspect of the culture is subsumed under this notion of culture, of the uniform culture. So all areas of intellectual creation, all areas, are subordinated in the same way and to the same end. By occupying men's sense from the time they leave the factory in the evening to the time they clock in again the next morning, with what? Matter that bears the impress stamp of the labor process they themselves have to sustain throughout the day. And there we are, the subsumption, okay, mockingly satisfies the concept of a unified culture which the philosophers of personality contrasted with the mass culture. Now, concerning this style, it's very helpful to read the start of the paragraph, the bottom page 131. And so the culture industry, the most rigid of all styles, proves to be the goal of liberalism, which is reproached for its lack of style. Now, this is interesting, especially if you think that how can you make your way, therefore, in this type of culture industry? How can you make your way? It is still possible. If you are not too obstinate about your own concerns, and you are appropriately pliable and not obstinate. So anyone who resists can only survive by fitting in. Okay, you have to fit in. In order to resist, you have to fit in. So you have to be pliable. You have to fit in this idea of uniformity. You have to conform yourself. This notion of uniformity absorbs any deviation from it. It does not repress the deviation. It absorbs it. On page 133, they quote, so Adorno and Horkheimer, they quote Tocqueville. The analysis Tocqueville offered a century ago has in the meantime proved wholly accurate. Under the private culture monopoly, it is a fact that, and this is the quote, tyranny leaves the body free and directs its attack at the soul. The ruler no longer says, "You must think as I do or die. He says, you are free to think as I do. Your life, your property, everything shall remain yours. But for this day on, you are a stranger among us. End of quote. Alexis de Tocqueville de la démocratie en Amérique. Alors, how they explicit that, and they say not to conform means to be rendered powerless economically and therefore spiritually, to be self-employed. When the outsider is excluded from the concern, he can only too easily be accused of incompetence. Wow. See, nowadays, is that so different from nowadays? They don't tell you, they don't force you, they just ignore the deviating one. Okay? They don't tell you to think how they think. They just make you powerless economically and spiritually. You have no place in that world. Now, what happens to the consumers? Okay? Now, the consumers belong to all classes, right? Especially to the workers, the farmers and lower middle class. They're the consumers, the vast majority of the population. How do they deceive them? The deception is put into place through the myth of success. Okay? And these are the words they use. The deceived masses are today captivated by the myth of success even more than the successful are. Immovably, they insist on the very ideology which enslaves them. What that makes me think of Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci. Why? Because it happens that a subordinate class, an oppressed class, adopt the ideology, so the spirit, the theoretical, the cultural part of the dominant class. So when this subordinate class thinks, express thoughts, it reproduces the interest of the dominant class, although it cannot act as the dominant class because it's oppressed. Because that's the fact. So being oppressed, it cannot act as an oppressed class, although it can adopt expression and ideology culture from the upper class. But the upper class uses that, injects that, so that by thinking in a way, they defend the interest of the upper class when they think, and when they work, they make the interest of the upper class. So that's the trap, the illusion. The illusion in this case, nowadays, is the myth of success. By misplacing the love of the common people so they move that love toward the wrong object, they obtain a greater result they would obtain if they use the force, the authority. That's the trick of the illusion, that they operate on the mass. And what is the instrument to carry out this misplacement of love? Culture industry. By craftily sanctioning the demand for rubbish, it inaugurates total harmony. demand from brand, sanctioning the demand for rubbish. They created the need. Okay, the connoisseur and the expert are despised for their pretentious claim to know better than the others, even though culture is democratic and distributes its privileges to all. And that is, in view of the ideological truths, the conformism of the buyer and the effrontery of the producers who supply them prevail. Okay? The conformism of the buyer and the effrontery of the producer who supplies them prevail. The result is a constant reproduction of what? The same thing. So there is the sameness, concept of sameness, coming back again and again. A constant sameness governs the relationships to the past as well. Then he jumped up. What is the new about the phase of mass culture compared with the late liberal stage is the exclusion of the new. The machine rotates on the same spot. While determining consumption, it excludes the untried as a risk. The movie makers distrust any manuscript which is not reassuringly backed by a bestseller. We stop here. But I want you really to pay attention that the sameness is the great leading concept of these pages. Sameness, same way, same product, same type of time, same labor process. Okay? Sameness is the key to understand these pages.